a series of Gates Australia webinars. Today our webinar is on troubleshooting the automotive and HD belts and their challenges. So we've got a guest presenter on today. He's one of our business development managers and he looks after our New South Wales and Queensland areas. It's Eli Tatalepu. He's going to be going through today's presentation. I hope I got that right, Eli, and apologies if I didn't. He'll go through today's presentation and give us a rundown on the do's and don'ts and the challenging area of our ABDS system, or the auxiliary drive belt system. So Eli, over to you. I'll be here in case you need me, but I'll sit back and take a back seat today. So over to you, mate.
Well, thank you there, Chris. Can you just do a quick audio check? You can hear me at the moment?
Yeah, we're all good. All good. Hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic.
So go for your life.
Fantastic. Look, thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Gates Australia, we'd like to welcome you all to one of our many webinars. My name is Eli, and I'm the Business Development Manager for Gates New South Wales. I'll be taking you through as I talk about the troubleshoot on both the automotive and commercial drive belts and the things you need to be aware. Okay, I apologise, just seem to have a tech issue. All right, here we go. I apologise. Okay, here are my discussion points that I will run through today. 1, it's important to understand and appreciate the key function of today's drive belt. 2, I will talk about the Gates initiative behind the B System Smart campaign, how we as technicians and mechanics should approach a system differently. 3, it's important to understand the old versus the new drive belt material, and I will highlight the key major differences in the drive belt evolution. 4, I will run through the newer improved belt wear gauge released by Gates and explain how to use it with ease. 5, the do's and don'ts before installing a new drive belt. 6, explain the 2 most common belt issues, the causes and how to fix it. And lastly, 7, we'll finish off with a summary and questions. So if you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free to type away. So let's begin. So why start with the drive belt? Well, simply put, the drive belt plays a pivotal role when it comes to the accessory belt drive system. It has one key role, and that is to transfer torque or power from the crank to the accessory that's running, be that of the alternator, the air conditioner, power steering, and the water pump. And anything that interferes with this process becomes a problem, and which will be elaborate more in this webinar. B System Smart is a Gates initiative to help educate technicians to look in the overall system. For example, the timing belt, the Gates timing belt kits. Gates was the pioneer in releasing such a program, supplying all the necessary components to do the job once and do it right. It simply means understanding how other components interact with that system and identify possible failures upstream and down, such as the drive belt system. Whilst we do sell separate components, as you see on the slide, but we do highly recommend to replace it with a micro V kit. If there's 3 points to consider, is this: 1, that hard parts are wear parts. 2, components have the same service life or replacement, and that's all due to the advancement of technology in research and development. And I'll touch more during this webinar as I speak. And lastly, B System Smart. This here is one of my favorite slides. Here I will highlight the misconception, make the correction, also highlight the missed opportunities due to the lack of understanding. It's important to understand that the evolution of the drive belt, and hope that after this slide, I highly recommend that you share this important information to your team members. If I can share you an experience, as one of my experiences, I've actually attended a reseller training, and when I showed this particular slide, this gentleman that was sitting in front of me just shook his head and just raised his hand. Why do we need to evolve? And that's a very interesting question. I thought about it without causing any embarrassment, and I just simply said, if we didn't evolve, we'd still be driving in Ford Model Ts. The whole room just burst out in laughter. But simply meant that the reason why we evolve is what we do as humans. It's in our DNA to push that boundary, to push the envelope. It's all about research and development. So how does that affect the drive belts? Well, simply put, in the early 70s to the pre-2000, we had a rubber compound which was called a neoprene, and lasting up to 60,000 kilometers. While it was good in its heydays, but the signs of wear is what the mechanics know it as, even to this day, is the crack in the belt. Now, as horsepower and technology increases, the OE wanted a belt that was long-lasting and robust. And Gates, being a manufacturer in its own rights and deals with the OE dealers across the world, came up with a new product called ABDS, which stands for ethylene propylene diamonomer. Now, I don't expect you to remember the name, but as long as you remember, it's a whole different technology. It's called ABDS. It is a synthetic rubber compound lasting over 100,000 kilometers. Lasting over 100,000 kilometers. So, as you can see, the big difference compared to the neoprene. And one of the methods that Gates been educating the mechanics because of this new technology, we highly recommend that one, that you inspect the drive out at 100,000 kilometers and to replace it at 150,000 kilometers. Now, I purposely wrote this in red. The signs of wear on it when it comes to an EPDM, they don't crack like the neoprene, but instead it wears out like a tire. Now, this is an important factor here. So a car that's traveled 150,000 kilometers will lose up to 20% of its material. But to this day, mechanics are still looking for the crack in the belt. If I could share you another experience. In the last 2 years, I have attended a lot of trade shows, conferences, reseller training, and educational training. If I was going to put all of them all together in one room, I would ask two basic questions. Give me a show of hands. Have you physically checked the drive out? And say about 70% of them would reply they would physically check it. The second question I would ask, what signs are you looking for to determine a worn belt? Almost majority of them reply, we're looking for the crack in the belt. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make the correction now. The drive belts don't crack. Instead, it wears out like a tire. So you need to understand that. That's the whole new technology in regards to the drive out of today. As I move along, in fact, I just already have a question from Daniel. Let me read. So how do we determine today's worn belt? Well, that's a good question there, Daniel, because we're about to go on to the next slide.
Eli, can I just
yes.
butt in there just for 1 second, and if you wouldn't mind going back to that previous slide.
By all means, Chris. Yes.
Look, ladies and gentlemen out there, I just want to reinforce what Eli's saying through this slide. This technology is not new, and the compound is certainly not new, but we make a point to show this slide because this technology and the material improvement is very poorly understood. Like Eli said there, in a room of assembled technicians, 70% are still looking for cracks. The ethylene propylene diamonomer, the EPDM material that we use today in all our drive belts, does not exhibit the signs of cracking. So it's really important to do the belt wear test, which Eli will show you shortly. So we include this slide because it is not new. However, it is very, very poorly understood. We're no longer looking for cracks. We're actually looking for material belt wear. So how much material has that belt lost? And rightly so, the new material can last up to about 150,000 Ks. And these are the challenges that automotive manufacturers challenge manufacturers such as Gates to achieve these milestones. I don't think anyone would be too happy these days with a belt that would only last 60,000 Ks. So that's why the material's been improved to become a lot more elastic. So it's still rubber, it's a synthetic rubber, but it is far more elastic than what it used to be. So back over to you, Eli.
No, thanks, Chris. I also like to highlight the, this misconception when the mechanics are looking at the drive belt. They're looking for the crack in the belt, and so they automatically assume that the belt's okay, when in fact, it's actually worn. So you're missing the opportunity of replacing that drive belt, and also maybe missing the opportunity of replacing that tensioner. So as I go to the next slide, Gates released a new belt wear gauge where it only takes seconds for a mechanic, even a DIY, to identify a worn belt. If I may add, it also won a AAA Tool of the Year award in 2017. As I'll go to the next slide, just to enlarge the actual picture of that instruction. Here, we look at the difference between a good and a worn belt. Noticeably, on the cross-section of the dry belt, on a good dry belt, as you can see, the shape compared to the worn belt being a triangle shape, you see after so many kilometers of travel, you see the worn material. So how does it work? Simply, allow me to summarize. One, with the engine off, I've got to say that we make sure that the engine is turned off. Two, you simply apply the tool onto the dry belt. Three, move it sideways. Move it sideways in a lateral movement. And if it wobbles, it shows it's a sign of a worn belt. A good belt won't move at all. So, talking to these technicians over the trade shows and so forth, so I came up with a jingle because in the advertised world, a jingle is made you to remember. So I shared this jingle and I'll share it with you now. It goes like this. If it wobbles, it's worn. If it's tight, it's right. Just repeat after me. If it wobbles, it's worn. If it's tight, it's right. You know what? Everyone just laughs at it, but they totally get it. And I see technicians just grab a handful of these tools out of my glass jar and start acting on it, taking it back to their workshops. And I'll also challenge them, if you find that your belt sales tension has increased over that week, you can thank me later. So here's what I recommend. One, request a belt wear gauge because it's free. You'd be silly if you don't. Make sure that every mechanic should have 3 or more in their toolbox and one that they carry in their pocket. The next point, train your mechanics to include it in their safety car check and make sure that they actively utilize the tool, because what takes mere seconds to check can turn into opportunities. And remember, and lastly, remember the jingle. I guarantee you can't go wrong. Okay.
That's awesome. Eli, just one more point, and I'm sorry to butt in. I think it's important though that you know, I share this as well, and like Eli said, it's a simple procedure. You engage the belt wear tool on the ribs of the drive belt, and you rock it and you wiggle it or wobble it. What we want you to do though is make sure you test both sides of the belt, because if it wiggles on one side or wobbles on one side of the belt, but on the opposite side of the belt it is tight and you cannot get that gauge to move, well then you've got an alignment problem. And when the reason we know that is because you're getting movement on one side and no movement on the other. And if you've got an alignment problem, what you're doing is you're not equally sharing the belt load across the full width of the belt. So in many cases, you will actually get a wobble on one side and no wobble at the opposite side of the belt. So important to check both you know, grooves across the whole belt width.
Absolutely right there, Chris, and thank you. Thanks for your comments there. And we will be discussing misalignment later on. So just moving forward to our next slide, allow me to introduce my friend Pat. It's the acronym for Pulleys, Alignment and Tension. So before installing a new drive belt, what you need to do is the following. One, make sure that the pulley's both ribbed and flat. It's clean from any foreign road and engine grime, simply by using soap and water or brake cleaner, because the last thing you need is the new drive belt to transfer all that rubbish around the whole system, and what you're going to get next is brake squeal. Two, alignment. Make sure that the pulleys are in the line and that they spin freely. I will touch more on the next 2 slides regarding the chirping effect. And 3, lastly, make sure that the tensioner is in good working order. In regards to the tensioner, I will be discussing more regarding the belt squeal. So basically, make sure we just clean the area before we put on the new drive belt. That's a simple message. You can just follow the PAT system. Okay, imagine a vehicle drives into your workshop with a drive belt issue, maybe squealing. You can do some simple tests by using a spray bottle if you're not aware. With a spray bottle, adjust the nozzle to spray a straight line. Spray the water on the underside of the belt, also where the shortest run, normally under the back of the idler, and then listen. If you hear the noise increasing, it's tension related. If you hear a chirping sound, it's more so alignment related. So, Okay, sorry, I just a little lost contact there. So once again, the noise increase is tension related. If you hear a chirping sound, it's more so an alignment related. So let's break this down. So with the bell squealing, the probable cause will be the tensioner. The key function of the tensioner is to supply a certain amount of tension and to absorb any peaks or trough like a shock absorber. But we need to understand that hard parts are wear parts, and over time, normal wear and tear will play a part. And so eventually the tensioner needs to be replaced. The tensioner becomes ineffective in its key function, whereby the belt will lose traction, causing the belt to slip or squeal. This is similar to what you're hearing in the tires screeching in the shopping car park. It's not because he or she is a fully sick driver. It is because the tire has lost traction with the road. And the same principle applies here. So if I can turn your mind back to the drive belt evolution that we discussed in the early slides, I want to share the ratio replacement with drive belts to tensioners from neoprene to this EPDM. Now we understand that the neoprene lasting up to 60,000. So we're looking at 2 drive belts to 1 tensioner. Now we fully understand how the EPDM drive belt works. We're looking at 1 to 1. So that means we replace the drive belt to 1 tensioner. If you look at my second point, the belt and tensioner has the same service life, so replace them together. So if you're replacing the drive belt today and not replacing the tensioner, you're missing out on that opportunity, but you're also going to cause issues down the track. I guarantee you that vehicle will come back. So when you're replacing a belt, replace the tension at the same time. It's a 1-on-1 ratio. And lastly, Be System Smart Initiative, just to let you know that yes, we do have the tensioner and belt replacement kit available in the market as well. The misalignment, they say that a picture tells 1,000 words, but the 3 types of misalignment, as you can see here, is one is the parallel misalignment. This is when the 2 pulleys in the same plane, but they are offset from each other. The second type of misalignment is called the angular, where the pulleys may be in the same plane but are a little opposite from each other. And the last one, what we call the pulley run-out. This is when the pulley will walk in and out as the RPM increase or decrease. The harmonic balance are beginning to create a problem for the drive system as the rubber inserts are beginning to break down, creating a misalignment. So in addition, the drive belt was designed to move in a rotational alignment direction. It was not designed to twist or bend from the pictures you see above. The system can only tolerate 1 degree of misalignment, and for each degree of that, over that, 30 degrees of heat. 30 degrees of heat will shorten the lifespan of the belt and bearing. So, what we need to understand overall is that one, that hard parts are wear parts, and they need to be looked at and to be replaced. We need to understand also that the drive belts are different today than it was back in the pre-2000. The belts last a lot longer, but they wear out, they don't crack, so you need that tool. Lastly, the belt and tensioner have the same service life, so replace them together. So keep that in mind. So next time you replace the drive belt, replace the tensioner. And remember our Gates message is inspect the drive belt at 100,000 kilometers and replace it at 150. And so, and be system smart.
Eli, just want to check in.
Yep.
Just want to check in with which slide you're on. I still have the spray bottle test.
Oh, you know what? Okay, sort of, yes. What's going on now? Beg your pardon, everyone. Okay. How's that? Okay.
There we go.
Okay, sorry, everyone. It's just a technical glitch here. So just sort of rephrasing from what I was just saying, the belt squealing, it's a problem causes the tensioner, because the tensioner is actually worn out. Tensioner becomes ineffective in its key function. So when we're looking at a belt squeal, it's because the tensioner has lost its effectiveness and the belt becomes loose, losing traction. That's what causes a belt. So when you hear a belt squeal, the probable cause is replace the tensioner, also replacing the belt. How's that, Chris? Can you see the next?
Yeah,
I want to make sure. Yeah.
got it, Eli. Yeah, and just recapping on that point, I mean, with the spray bottle test, that's a really simple way to diagnose a fairly common problem. Like Eli explained, locate the shortest span between two pulleys and squirt water on the rib side of the belt. If the noise gets louder, you've got a tension issue because your belt's just screaming through the pulley and not getting enough traction. If the noise goes away momentarily and then returns, you've got an alignment issue. So the water's acting like a lubricant. And again, reinforcing the point on your next slide, the tensioner is there primarily to take away all those peak and trough loads in that drive system. We see this in some short videos, which will be available from Gates on our YouTube channel as well, on damping of the auxiliary drive system. And it's really important, for everyone out there to go and have a look at those, and you can see the effect that a tensioner does have in trying to smooth out those belt loads on the actual drive belt and stop that belt whipping around. So no, we're all good.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, by all means, if you also need any of those beltware tools that we've got available, it's free. By all means, just send us your, just type away your contact details, business details, and we're only just too happy to pass that on. Chris, is there anything you'd like to add on to that? No, otherwise, if there's no other questions, I just want to say thank you very much for your time.
Sorry, Eli. I was on mute, Eli. Sorry about that. Look, right, I just do want to recap, and what Eli's brought to you this morning, this afternoon, is pretty important. I mean, the auxiliary belt drive system in any vehicle is a really important system. Unfortunately, too often it's overlooked. The belt plays a real important part to ensure that all the components within the system work effectively, that you do get the drive through your alternator and your power steering and your other accessory drives, that the power that's meant to be transmitted by the belt is efficiently transmitted to all those components. So it's very important to have that system working effectively and efficiently, and that way you're going to get the best fuel economy and the best performance from your vehicle. Every component within that system plays a very, very important part. So our B System Smart message is, do not look at one component in isolation. You're doing a job on a water pump and it's driven by the auxiliary belt, have a look at the belt as well, and the tensioners and the idler pulleys, and perhaps have a look at the alternator decoupler pulley as well. All these components are there to work as one complete system. Failure of one of those components or ineffective traction on one of those components is going to lead to a premature failure somewhere within that system. Just that one on the, if you can go to the slide, Eli, on the misalignment, please. So I think it was for that one there. Look, the other important factor is, there's three important factors in any drive system. It's tension. So we've got to have a tensioner that's adequately working. We've got to have the ability for that tensioner, or the next one is damping. So we've got to have the ability for that tensioner to take out the peak and trough loads. And the last, and probably the most critical element of any drive system, is the alignment. If you've got pulleys that are either parallel misaligned or angular misaligned, you're going to get belt life reduction. It's going to be pretty significant. We want our belts to last about 150,000 Ks, but we absolutely know, and our statistics tell us, that all belts, or about 96% of belts, fail prematurely, and that is predominantly because one of these three very important factors are just not there in this drive system. Either we've got a misalignment problem, we've got a tensioner issue, or the tensioner cannot apply enough load to dampen the loads in that system. There on the screen on the right-hand side, you see our driver-line laser alignment tool. Very, very simple tool and very inexpensive. It couples to basically the crankshaft pulley. It's magnetic and it shoots a laser across it corresponding pulleys. So very, very simple way to identify if your pulleys are out of alignment. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, that graphic there showing you a parallel misalignment or an angular misalignment, and also pulley run out as well, which all those different issues need to be addressed whenever you're replacing a new drive belt. Otherwise, it will lead to premature drive belt failure. So Be System Smart is our clear message for today, and I think Eli's done that quite a few times. Be System Smart, look at the whole drive belt system, not only one component in isolation. Look, if you've got any questions, by all means, you can type them in. We'll keep the lines open for a few minutes if you don't want to type, and you can come off mute and maybe ask it directly. We're here to help. The belt wear gauges are an important tool, and like Eli said, they did win an award at the AAA show in 2017. And the use of that gauge is very important. Get yourself a handful of them, put them in your toolbox and scatter them around the workshop. They're really important. If it wiggles, it's worn, and if it's tight, it's all right. So like Eli said, that's one that you can remember, really easy to remember. Like I said, make sure you're checking both sides of the belt, because if you've got a misalignment issue, you tend to wear one side of the belt predominantly more than the other. So that is definitely an issue that you want to address before installing a new belt. Be sure to use the right belt of the right material. If you've got a high performance vehicle and your vehicle's using one of their RPM belts, which you might see on some of the supercharged vehicles, it's got to be replaced with the same type of belt. If you've got a stretch fit belt, stretch fit belts are being used more and more by engine manufacturers around the world, simply because they're reliable and they're more efficient, and you know, they're easier to install and they reduce components within that engine bay. It's really important to make sure and consult your auto parts reseller on the right belt for your application and your vehicle. So I think in summary, you know, don't overlook this system. Make sure at every opportunity you do inspect it. Rotate the tensioners and the idlers. If you hear any noises or anything that relates to a system issue or perhaps a reliability issue, talk to your auto parts store and make sure that they've got the parts to overhaul the whole system. So that's all from me. Eli, back to you.
No, thank you very much for that, Chris, for your comments.
We're only too happy to help out. We're here to make sure that you get good, reliable service from the Gates-related products. So this presentation, in case you do have some colleagues or other people that may wish to have another look through it, or you want to pass it on to some colleagues or some work friends that you feel might get a benefit from it, there'll be a link emailed to you shortly with instructions on how to view this presentation again. And that's it from me.
That's it from me as well. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everyone. So we'll just hold the line, see if there's any questions. Please feel free to unmute, or if you want to type away.